Donald Trump's march to the White House continues, and so do the calls within the Republican Party to stop him. Earlier this week, the billionaire warned that riots could break out if he's denied the party's presidential nomination. But there are still questions about whether he can secure enough delegates in time for the Republican convention this summer. If he falls short, what are the possible scenarios? And how are the Democrats positioning themselves? For these stories and more, we're joined by our U.S. political panel, Paul Brandis of the West Wing Reports and Louisa Savage of Politico. Both are in our Washington studio. Hello to you both. So, Paul, we've once again, we've seen some more acts of violence and more protests at Trump events. What do you make of that and of his warning, of Trump's warning, that blocking his nomination could cause riots?
Well, it's interesting, Andrew, that this violence that we see, we don't see this at any other candidate rallies. It's only at these Trump rallies, even though he says he's not a man of violence. But he himself has said, of course, go ahead, punch that guy out, carry him out on a stretcher, I'll pay the legal bills, and so forth. So that is the tone and the rhetoric that he is perhaps not so subtly encouraging. And he said this past week, that if he does not win the nomination in Cleveland this summer, if they try somehow to take it away from him, that there could be riots. So who knows what that means? But again, the talk of the rhetoric and the violence, I mean, he's the only one doing it. So it's possible that he might not get the delegates to win on the first ballot. He has to get about 60% of the remaining ones, which mathematically might be challenging for him. So who knows what's going to happen?
Louisa, what do you make of that? Because we started to show some of the B-roll of a man getting kicked and punched. Maybe we have some more of that so we can give people an idea of what it is that we're talking about. But I mean, it looks particularly vicious. Yeah, here it is coming up. It just seems particularly violent. And how concerning is that?
Well, I think this is very concerning. I mean, this is the last thing that you want to be doing is revving up, racial resentments and political resentments that turn to violence. And this is part of, I think, what you'll see Trump being attacked on is this notion that how is he presidential and how can he be trusted as somebody with this kind of aggressive, unpredictable temperament. So I think you'll see that as part of the anti-Trump script going forward, and it certainly has Republicans very concerned and people who you never even would have imagined supporting Ted Cruz in the Washington establishment now turning to Ted Cruz and saying anyone but Trump.
So what do you think is going to happen with this? Do you think that is there going to be a movement towards Ted Cruz, Paul?
Well, I think that's already underway. What Republicans have been doing, there have been a series of meetings here in Washington this week, and these establishment for the anti-Trump crowd, let's just say that, has laid out what they call a 100-day strategy the next 3 months or so to lay the groundwork for giving the nomination to Cruz and peeling away these Trump supporters if necessary, one by one. It's important to remember that these delegates that Trump has, and he's over the halfway mark in terms of the number that he needs. These delegates are only bound to vote for him on the first ballot. So the strategy is to deny him the 1237 he needs to win on the first ballot, move it to the second ballot where anything goes, and then hopefully by then, according to their strategy, is to line up all these other voters to deny him the nomination on a second ballot. That's pretty much what it comes down to.
Louise, as you watch some of these images, so we're just showing some images of that blockade on a highway on the way to a Trump rally. We see the protesters go and make their case. Sometimes they're disruptive. Sometimes they just stand there quietly. Does this embolden people that may be thinking about Trump, or is this starting to make people think that this guy, Donald Trump, has to be stopped?
Well, it seems that nothing is really hurting him among his supporters. If anything, they're being emboldened, as you say. But everyone else is growing increasingly alarmed. And so, as Paul said, he has to now get about 60% of the remaining delegates in order to clinch the nomination between now and the convention. So we're going to see what happens now that Ted Cruz is basically the last man left standing other than Kasich. The fact that Rubio is now out of the race, is that going to now really consolidate that concern and that opposition to Trump and really deny him a few of these remaining winner-take-all states that could prevent him from getting the nomination? But that's been the incredible thing in this race, is that no matter what outrageous thing he says, he continues to keep gathering support. One other thing I would note is that this week we saw Fox News, the sort of bastion of conservative television, really start attacking Trump because he's gone after their anchor, Megyn Kelly. And it'll be interesting to see if that makes any difference when you have some of the big popular Fox News hosts now criticizing Trump as well. So I think the next few weeks and months between now and June are going to be fascinating.
When you hear Trump say there will be riots if he doesn't clinch the nomination, if the establishment tries to stop him, do you think that that's going to just foment even the potential for even more violence from Trump supporters?
I mean, there's enormous potential for unrest and upheaval at the conventions, but I would just note that it's not just the establishment, it is the conservative wing of the Republican Party that is also opposed to Trump. The people who are pushing Ted Cruz, the people who are having these meetings in D.C. that Paul mentioned, these are not just, the Jeb Bush sympathizers. These are people who look at Trump and say, he is not a conservative and will be giving up our party to someone we don't trust, someone who supported Hillary Clinton in the past and who's going to make deals with Democrats. So it's very interesting to see those two wings of the party come together. I think there's enormous potential for upheaval at the convention because it's not only about who will support who on the second ballot when the delegates are unbound, but also what will the rules be? So there's a rule right now that was adopted in 2012 for that convention that said you can only be a potential nominee if you've won 8 states. So far, that means only Trump and Cruz. But if they change that rule, you're going to see all kinds of upheaval because it'll look like the insiders of the party are trying to jerry-rig the process to favor one candidate or another. So there are a lot of potential conflicts and arguments and coming out, and you can be sure that they're thinking about that right now and thinking about the security perimeter, and how to keep this whole thing under control. And it's interesting, a lot of corporate sponsors of events around the conventions, from what I've been hearing, have been pulling out and saying they're afraid of what might go on. They don't want their brands associated. So there is a rising tide of concern about what's going to happen.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so Paul, let's turn to the Democratic side. And how long do you think, I know I ask you this every week, but with Hillary Clinton as she builds bigger and bigger victories, I mean, how much longer do you think Bernie Sanders is going to stay in?
Well, she had a real big night on Tuesday. She ran the board, and mathematically, it's pretty much over at this point. If you look at the numbers, Andrew, it looks like Sanders would need to win about 75% of the remaining delegates. There's simply no way for that to happen. There are only two things at this point, I think, that could stop Hillary Clinton. Both, I think, are quite unlikely. The first, and I've mentioned this before, is some kind of legal issue to pop up concerning this alleged email scandal. The FBI could possibly ask a grand jury to indict her. I think the chances of that are quite remote. And the second one is the getting hit by a bus scenario. I mean, there's really nothing that's going to get in her way at this point. And I think there's a lot of talk behind the scenes of how to nudge Sanders out of the race. The president himself is kind of getting involved in that now. Clinton herself cannot call for Sanders to drop out. I think the feeling is that would alienate the Sanders crowd, but her surrogates certainly can. And the issue is for her now is, can she bring the Sanders supporters over to her in the fall? Back in 2008, there were worries that Clinton supporters wouldn't back Obama in the fall. Well, most of them did. So I think Clinton thinks she can do the same now.
And Paul, on President Obama, we've seen him play a bigger role. We've also seen him take shots at Donald Trump. Do you think he should be playing a bigger role in this campaign?
Well, this fall, he's certainly going to be on the campaign trail in a major way, particularly in the swing states. He has two goals. One, of course, is to get Hillary Clinton elected, but the second is to bolster his legacy. And frankly, seeing Clinton elected, I think, in his eyes, would be a validation of his a legacy. He's frankly chomping at the bit to go out there and take it to these Republicans, particularly to Trump if he gets the nomination, because this is the guy, the president is quick to remember, this is the guy who brought up the Obama was born in Kenya, Obama's a Muslim. Trump is the one who fanned the flames of all this a couple of years ago. So I think the president is eager to get a little bit of revenge this fall.
So, and Louisa, on the point that Paul was making in terms of some of these new voters, the millennials, the younger people that were in the Bernie Sanders camp, do you think once Bernie Sanders is out, if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, are they going to come out and support Hillary Clinton, perhaps just to stop Donald Trump?
I think that's quite possible. I also think that that's a big role for President Obama to play. He's very popular with young people. He knows how to work social media and alternative forms of media. He does all kinds of things with entertainers. He knows how to reach young people very effectively, and they were a big part of his support in his elections. So you could really see him as a bridge to those voters, and also as someone who unifies the party behind the eventual nominee and brings the Sanders people and the Hillary Clinton people together. He's there to protect his legacy, and this is very important to him, both not just the presidential race, but also the Senate, which will be voting on things like Supreme Court nominees. So he's got a lot at stake here personally in how this election turns out.
Great talking to both of you. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul Brandis of the West Wing Reports and Louisa Savage of Politico. They were both in Washington.